Today I'm going to be tying up a standard trout nymph. This is a Prince Nymph, although this one is tied with a soft hackle instead of a rooster hackle for the collar. The Prince Nymph is a wonderful trout nymph. It has all the characteristics of mayflies or caddis or little stonefly or something like that, and it's a great attractor pattern. So if you're on a stream that's new to you and you've never fished it before and you've got some pockets or some runs or whatever and you're looking for fish, this is an excellent fly to tie on to search around for the trout. And it's also a great panfish fly. The Beadhead version right here has got a little bit of extra weight with the bead and on the shank with some lead wraps. So this is a wonderful fly even if you're just wanting to get out for an evening of some bass and bluegill. So that's the soft-hackled Beadhead Prince Nymph, and we'll go ahead and get started tying. We're going to start our Beadhead Prince Nymph with our hook and the vise here. I've gone ahead and put the bead on the hook already. This is a 1/8 inch gold bead, and the hook I'm using is a Mustad 9671 size 14. You could use a, say, like a 3906B or a Tiemco 5262 if you want. It has to be a longer shanked hook simply because we have the bead on the front. So I start with my hook and the vise. I'm going to go ahead and debarb the hook. And then the first thing I'm going to do is put some lead wraps on here. I'm using a lead wire. This is a .015 lead wire. Generally I use a lead wire that's going to be about the same diameter as the hook shank. You could certainly use something a little bit bigger if you want. Keep in mind there's two ways to add weight to this fly aside from putting the bead on the front, and that's with more wraps of a smaller diameter wire or a few wraps of a heavier or thicker diameter wire. I'm going to start my wraps in the back of the hook shank, and I'm going to put 15 wraps of lead on this. And 15 is just what I prefer. It gives me just about the right amount of weight for this fly. I could add a little bit more, I could add a little bit less, or I should say take away and have a little bit less, but 15 works for me. I'm then going to take the lead and I'm going to shove it all forward and pack it right inside that bead, and that will stabilize that bead right up on the front, and so it won't move around when I'm tying in the rest of the material. For thread, I'm using just a Uni-80 in red. The red will end up giving me some extra wraps right behind the bead and a little bit of a hot spot to this fly. I'm going to attach my thread right behind the lead wraps, get my thread anchored on the hook. Then I'm going to proceed to build a little bit of a thread dam right behind those lead wraps. I'm going to wrap my lead forward up to behind the bead, putting just a few wraps crisscross on the lead. And that's just to hold it in place, smooth it out a little bit, and make it easier to tie in other materials on top of it. When I'm done, I'm going to advance my thread down the hook shank all the way down to the end, which is just between the point of the hook and the barb. Now we're going to tie in our tail, and our tail is made out of goose biots. These are just brown goose biots right here. I'm going to strip 2 of these off, and I'm going to cut the curly ends right here off. And I want these have a natural curve to them, and I want them basically to curve outward when I tie them in. So I'll take one of these and flip it over, match it with the other one like this, so I get a curve, a natural curve that goes out. Even those tips up just a little bit. I want to tie that tail in so that the tail is about the length of the body. A shank length, if you measure from in front of the bead to the end of the shank, that would be fine. I want to set it on here so that both of the biots go on both sides of the hook shank, just like this. And then to tie that in, I'm going to pinch with my left hand, and I'm going to do a pinch wrap with my thread, bringing it down the other side, and I'm just gently going to pull. I'm not pulling very hard right here, because I can then move those biots back over to my side if they end up getting pulled over to the other side a little bit. I'll put one more wrap in to double check. I also want to make certain that the biots are on the side of the hook, just like that is right there. And then get those in the right position. I'll put in a few more wraps, adding a little more tension moving forward just to make certain that they're anchored in place. I do want to wrap down the hook shank, and I want to make certain that I get a few wraps in right at the very end of the hook shank. That anchors that tail in, but it also establishes the very back end of the body, which is going to be right here, and that'll be important in just a moment. Advance my thread forward. I'm going to snip off the ends, the butt ends of the biots, so that they meet just about the back end of the lead. I'm going to wrap forward. You don't have to do touching turns on this. I do just to make it a little bit smoother. And I'm going to advance my thread to about an eye length behind the bead here. That gives me a nice smooth body. Now we're going to tie in our peacock herl. Most people at this point would tie in their rib material, and I'm using a size 18 Danville Oval Gold Tinsel for the rib. You could use a flat mylar tinsel if you want. Some people even use a wire. That's fine. Most people would tie that in the back here, then advance your thread forward to tie in the peacock herl. Then you have to lash the peacock herl back down here and then move back up here to anchor it in when you actually wrap the body on. Since I'm already up this way from smoothing off the tail butt ends in the body, I prefer to just go ahead and tie in my peacock herl. This is just some strung peacock herl. I've selected 4 herls, and I've trimmed off the tips right here to even them up. You don't have to do it this way. It's up to you. This is just another way that this fly is put together. I'm going to advance my thread down the end of the hook shank to about the point. Now I'm going to tie in my rib. My rib is going to get tied in on the underside of the hook shank. And I tie this in this way and move the rib to the opposite side of the hook, so that when I'm wrapping further down, I want to make certain that rib is on the underside of the hook, and I'll show you why in just a second. So I advance my thread down the hook shank now, and I'm going to advance it all the way down to the end of where the body is. Remember, I mentioned before that we wrapped our thread down here to the very end of the body. I want to make certain I don't go past that, because I don't want to wrap the herl on or the thread and close up the tail back here. I've got it just the way I want it, so I want to stop right at the very end of where the body is. Then I can wrap my thread forward, and I'm going to wrap right up to behind the bead. At this point, I'm ready to go ahead and wrap my peacock herl on. I'm stroking the peacock herls out a little bit just to make certain that they're all under the same thread, or not thread tension, but under the same tension. Then I won't have to worry about them spreading out as I am wrapping these on the hook. And I'm just going to start wrapping these forward. I want each wrap to be right in front of the previous one. The intent is to get a nice, smooth, tapered body. If the peacock herl doesn't taper, that's fine. Even if it's just a nice level body, that will work. Just try to make it with each turn right in front of the other one so you get a nice full body. I do want to leave about half an eye length behind the eye of the hook here. So I'm not going to wrap this all the way up to the bead. I'm going to stop just short one wrap. And I'll explain why in a moment. I'm going to cut off the excess peacock herl here. You want to make certain to save these. I always keep just a little Ziploc bag on my tying desk while I'm tying these up so that I can just tuck these away. These come in real handy if you're doing any small midges or brassies or something like that, just having those little odd bits. Not long enough to do, a nymph like this, but just perfect for those smaller flies. The reason we're leaving this space right here is I have to tie in the rib, and then I have to tie in a hackle, and then I have to tie in the biots for the horns on this. All of that is going to build up. If I'm jammed right up against the bead right here, then I'm going to pile everything up on top of that bead, and I don't want to. I want everything to be nice and neat just right behind the bead. So with our body of herl wrapped in, I'm going to go ahead and take my rib. Now I pointed out earlier that I want to make certain that the rib is tied in on the underside of the hook, and the reason for that is I want my first wrap to come just in front of the tail like this. If I come too close to the tail like this, I have the chance of actually moving that tail a little bit. So I tie it in on the bottom or even a little bit towards the outside of the hook, so that first wrap just comes right over the top and starts the actual rib up the body. I'm going to put in 4 to maybe 5 wraps. I generally get 4 wraps on the body, and my 5th one is right on the outside of the bead towards me. I'll anchor that in, and I'll trim away the excess. One thing you want to be careful of as you are tying all of this in right behind this bead, you want to be careful with your thread wraps. The 8/0 is a small thread, but at the same time it can build up pretty quick right behind that bead. Now we're ready for our hackle. Traditionally, or as far as I know, traditionally all of the Prince Nymphs that I've seen tied before use a rooster hackle, a saddle hackle, or even a rooster neck hackle will work, but it's a stiffer fiber feather. I prefer to use a soft hackle, so I'm just using a Speckled Hen. You could use an all brown hen if you want. Even Hungarian partridge is used on some of these, but I'm just going to be using some Speckled Hen. I like the softer look. I don't know that it necessarily makes the fly fish better than using a rooster hackle, but I just prefer the look of it. So I've prepped this by stroking the fibers back away from the tip, trimming the tip so I have just a little triangle right here to anchor in. I'll tie that in right behind the bead. Remember, we want to be cautious with our thread wraps. I don't want to put too many in here and build that up too much. And I don't need this whole feather for the collar on this. Actually, I only want about 1 to 1.5 turns, maybe 2. Depends on the feather, depends on how thick it is, how thick you want the collar to be. Remember, we just need something that's going to suggest some legs here. We don't need something that is going to be that pronounced. So I get about 1.5 turns of this behind the bead. I will lock it in with a few turns. Trim away the excess. If you have a feather like this also, it can't really be used for much more, but keep these around, because if you get glue in the eye of the hook, these are perfect for just running down in there and cleaning that eye out. I'm going to moisten my fingers, and I'm going to stroke these fibers in a downward and back direction. You don't have to have these down on the lower portion of the fly like this, but that's generally where all the legs are going to be. So if you can get them down in that direction, that's fine. Some people will actually trim away the fibers that are on top. So fibers like this right here that are sticking out right on top, they may just go ahead and trim those out, but you can also leave those in if you want. So now we're ready for the horns, wings, some people call them. We're going to use some white Goose Biots again. I'm going to strip a couple of these off, and I'm going to trim away the ends of these. So I'll trim away the butt ends of these, and I'm going to tie these in one at a time. There's different ways you can do this, but this works for me. I'm going to set this up here. I want the tip to be just about to the bend of the hook, maybe a little bit past if you like, but I'm going to have it cross at a shallow angle. It's going to set right up here and cross right on the very top of the hook behind the bead. And then what I'll do is I'll take my scissors and bring them in and drop them in behind the bead, cut the excess off. This is going to leave just a little portion of the butt ends of those biots right tucked in behind that bead, just like that. And then we'll do the same thing with the other one, matching our length here. I want the length to be the same as the other. It'll cross over right in the center of the top of the hook and the bead. I'll cut off the excess like this, and I'll tie that in. Just get a couple wraps on there and then take a look. Make certain that it's setting the way you want. It's at the right angle. I'm going to put in a few more wraps to start to anchor that in, but I'm not going to put in a lot of wraps here because, again, I don't want to build that up too much. At this point, I'm going to use my whip finisher, and I'll finish up those last remaining wraps with the whip finish so that I don't build up too much. But what this gives me is a nice hot spot, a nice band of red right behind the bead is a little bit of an attractor. When I'm done with the thread, I'll go ahead and trim that away. You get any that are sticking out like this right here, you can just go ahead and cut that out. Some of them don't want to cooperate too much. There you go. I'm going to take my head cement and I'm going to put a generous drop. This is a fly-tight head cement, a thinner head cement. It'll soak right in behind those biots. You can even put a little dollop of Zap-A-Gap on there if you want, but it'll just help bind those horns or the biots in under that thread. I'll go ahead and put some right on the underside. You can see how that just soaks right down in there, and that will secure our fly. And that is the soft hackle beadhead Prince Nymph. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video and not only learned a new pattern, but maybe learned some new techniques and a few new skills. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button below. You can support Dressed Irons by hitting the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos are published. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.